This? I won't touch that, sorry. Welcome to the Asylum Theater's California Room, and to this production of Down to Earth. This show is part of the Hollywood Fringe Festival 2023, celebrating its 13th year with over 300 different shows, workshops, and parties throughout Hollywood. Be sure to pick up a festival guide in the lobby and check out more shows throughout the month of June and into July with the Fringe Encore series. Please turn off your phones and electronic devices. None of that beepy business, please. Note the emergency exits, which may be in front or behind you. Enjoy the show.
Despite what you may have heard, this is a true story. And some of it actually happened. Some of it was lifted verbatim from interviews with real park rangers. Some of it was inspired by traditional indigenous wisdom, and some of it is just jokes. But all of it comes from a place of love and wonder and respect. So with all of that in mind, I want to tell you about this time a few years ago when I went on a spiritual retreat. I drove up the mountain where it was taking place, and I got there early, which, if we're completely honest, is kind of where the miracle starts. But with no one else around, I found my way into this little chapel with the tabernacle. For those of you not as familiar, the tabernacle is basically a box. It's this medium-sized box that's often very ornamented. Think treasure chest. It's this golden box made of metal or heavy wood that serves as a secure and sacred place in which to store the Blessed Sacrament. You know, the little wafers? Basically, I walked up to Jesus' treasure chest in this little chapel like a good Catholic boy. I settled in and started to get bored. Definitely another important Catholic tradition. Then I noticed the intricate stained glass windows behind the tabernacle. They were covered in these long, thin strips of green glass, and they were arranged to look like reeds, rippling in the wind all along the back wall of the chapel. The afternoon sunlight was making the glass glow, so it looked like the reeds were actually moving. They looked alive. Then I noticed that if I tilted my head just a little to the left, I could see next to the stained glass there were these plain, ordinary windows, which I'd completely failed to notice with all the majesty in the air. Just outside those ordinary windows, there was another patch of tall green grasses, also blowing in the wind. They weren't quite as pretty, but they were alive, like actually. The longer I stared through the ordinary windows at the uglier, living reeds, the more I was amazed by the decision to encase the body of Christ, the divine, in a box of glass, steel, and gold. To elevate it? To convince other people it was important? Don't get me wrong, I love that I grew up Catholic, but it was taught through this really old piece of theater, right? This dusty old play that we all decided as a family to go and see every weekend. Like, hey honey, what should we do this Sunday? Well, I was thinking we could see the show we see every week. But honey, we've literally seen it 1,000 times. Yes, but the kids want to do the Easter egg hunt. All right, let's go. I mean, the church has God on their side, so they're always going to fill the seats. But I think the production value has really declined lately, which is a bummer because the church and the theater are really some of the only places we get to exercise a particular flavor of spirituality, or even mysticism. You might hear mysticism and go, whoa, hey Drew, that's old stuff. That's not relevant anymore. Mysticism? Didn't we kill all the druids? Bloody and how. We killed like so many druids. But with these mystic venues in decline, to be honest, I think we've all sort of atrophied. Not long ago, we all clasped hands and shouted to the heavens together, but today, it's harder to do that kind of thing. Suspending our judgment or our disbelief, it's more difficult these days. For example, I'd like us all to extend our hands to the person sitting next to you. Nah, that's too much. Or is it? Our cathedrals are crumbling, and in many places, Our theaters are creaky and cobwebbed. So it's kind of a miracle that you're here. What we're doing is as old as humanity, but it doesn't work without your imagination, without your willing suspension of disbelief. So if you're down to help, to lean in with your hearts and minds and imaginations, I've got this story, this crazy dream I had that I want to tell you about. Growing up, I always wanted to be a park ranger at a national park. I remember lying on my back alone in the woods, trying to name every plant and animal I could see. I like to imagine how their lives merged into each other, right? Stuff becoming other stuff in this giant living organism. I thought, what if there was some kind of Jesus figure with the perspective to clear out all the illusions and really tap into the whole network of life? What if they showed up and took me on a hike? I have so many questions. And yes, this is weird in about 15 different ways. So I'm truly thankful, honored that you're going on this journey with me. I don't just want to tell the story, it feels like something I need to tell. So I'd ask you to listen to this music. Let it take you somewhere you're not yet, but you'd like to be. You're about to meet Jean Christ. It's a little bit nuts, but you know what? Fuck it.
There was a master come unto earth, born in the holy land of Michigan, raised in the mystical hills north of Fort Wayne. The master learned of this world in the public schools of Michigan, and as he grew, in his trade as a park ranger and weekend docent. But the master had learnings from other lands and other schools, from other lives that he had lived. The master loved the land and believed he was loved by the land in turn. In believing, he was able to commune with creation, to help himself, and be a help to all mankind. As he believed, it came to be. His teachings moved hearts, sprouted forests, and eradicated apathy. The master believed it is well for any man to think upon himself as a son of creation, a piece of the living planet, one of the divine, and as he believed, so it was. Several chief rangers and park administrators bid the master return his hat and badge and go on his way, for so totally was he crowded that many an information kiosk and parking lot were overrun, and that was actually pretty annoying. So it was that he came from the woods and was of the woods. Some began to call him the Messiah, the worker of miracles, a prophetic park ranger, and as they believed, so it was. Despite healing many, the master failed to share the true source of his power, the healing that came from the land was not his alone to command, but still they looked to him and not beyond. And so he went on his way through the crowds and left.
I met Jean at the beginning of an early spring. It was warmer than normal and the wildflowers were out in full force. I'd been working at the Huron-Manistee National Forest up in Michigan for about a year and a half when he showed up. I was mostly cleaning out the toilets and repairing the fences along the trails, but that was totally fine by me. I love being outside. But I was getting this feeling of restlessness. I dreamed about this job for years and years. But I don't know. I guess I made it. I had plenty of free time at the park, so I was kind of surprised when Vicky, that's our chief, said that we were getting a new ranger from up north. She said his name was Gene and he'd been in parks for ages. He sounded like a cool guy. But Vicky said he'd had some issues out at his last placement, so he was coming out here for a low-profile assignment. So I was on onboarding duty. I had to buy some food and hang a sign and hang out until he showed up. Hello, hello. Nobody? Looks like I'll be working on this egg salad by myself for a bit. Mmm, divine. I ate 15 eggs in a day once. Yep. Hard boiled. You start to wonder once you've polished off a full dozen if it's really all that good for the old plumbing. So I had a few more. Then I called it a day. Great eggs, man.
Hey, Rangers, I'm short-staffed at the front. I've got an elderly woman and her caretaker that need a guide. Any takers?
This is Drew checking in. I can take this one and I'll bring Gene with me to show him the ropes.
Showtime. Hello and welcome to the Huron-Manistee National Forest. The calendar in the office said that we had a delegation of geezers set to show, but it just ended up being this old lady in a wheelchair and this younger lady in scrubs, probably her caretaker. They said that the other folks that had signed up chickened out because it was a bit rainy, but Dorothy made it. Dorothy was determined to see the spring wildflowers, so she got the activities nurse, Lisa, to pack up the wheelchair, and they snuck off together. Not totally above board, which clearly made Lisa nervous, but Dorothy seemed to be loving it. And Gene was great, super sweet. He kneeled down right away. I noticed with him kneeling down that even though it was raining outside, there wasn't a single mark on his pants or shoes. In fact, there wasn't a single scrape or scuff on any part of his uniform. Still kneeling in front of Dorothy, Gene grinned and reached around her wheelchair to grab a handful of blooming lemon balm. He chomped down on the leaves, chewing slowly, making these little lip-smacking sounds. Totally hamming it up, trying to make Dorothy laugh, which she refused to do until she finally cracked this giant smile and grabbed some of the leaves to nibble on. All of a sudden, she got this distant look in her eyes, like she'd heard something far away. She looked up at Lisa, but Lisa was looking at Gene, so then Dorothy dropped the leaves and looked down at her feet. Then she got up and walked over to the patch of wildflowers to gather some more for herself. Normally that would be perfectly fine, but Lisa shrieked and reached out and rushed over to Dorothy. We then found out that Dorothy hadn't been able to use her legs for the last 17 years. After a pause, Gene goes, "I guess I'm gonna have to give you a ticket for parking in the handicap spot." Lisa just stared at me and Gene, mouth open, kind of scared, and Dorothy, sweet Dorothy, just kept rubbing her legs and wiggling her toes in her little pink compression socks and sandals. I got them some lemonade. I didn't know what else to do. Lisa and Dorothy just kept laughing, which turned into crying, and then laughing again, and then they took off down the path together. They left the wheelchair right there in the middle of the trail. I left it there too. Not gonna lie, I was a little nervous to touch it. Once we were out of earshot, I turned to Gene and stared at him, waiting for him to say something, but he just smiled and stared back, so I'm like, "What the hell was that, man?" And he goes, "Whoa, I can heal things." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Well, actually, I just help things heal themselves." And then Vicky calls and tells me that I gotta take care of, and I quote, "a clogged toilet of biblical proportions." I turn back to Gene and he goes, "I think I'm supposed to be your teacher. Go fix the crapper, and I'll see you later." And then he left. Gene, I got us on a private channel. Are you there?
Roger, Dodger. I read you loud and clear.
What was that, man?
What do you need?
How the heck did you heal that woman?
Oh, well, what a lot of people don't realize about miracles is that you do have to let them happen.
Buddy, you know that sounds ridiculous, right?
Yeah, that's part of the problem.
Gene, I don't know you very well, but it kind of sounds like you're trying to piss me off.
Hey, if you're getting pissed off, maybe it's because you're looking for something that you're not getting. You sound a little frustrated, Fred.
Yeah, you just healed a paralyzed woman and you're telling me you have to let it happen? What?
Well, it doesn't always work like that, but a lot of times it does. Sounds like you are hoping for something to flash here, huh?
Well, yeah, what you did just seems like, I don't know, I thought there'd be more.
Everything is just different kinds of energy. And our reality is just the way we perceive them all. Everything can become something else. The lane you're standing on does it every second. It's kind of what this whole place does, you know?
Everything is becoming something else, all the time. But I was pretty gratified by his amazement. When you do miracles often enough, you know, they can become a little mundane. So we walked together, and I told him what I'd learned over the years in the parks. Probably from the parks. That all energy is just becoming different kinds of energy. So if you can change yours, it usually has an impact on other people. He asked me about the newspapers and articles from my old post. They started to call me the park ranger prophet. Some silly stuff like that. But it got me thinking about all those years as a ranger. Probably the craziest thing I ever saw was a massive snapper. A giant snapping turtle. Must have been 200 pounds. Walking down High Bridge Road. Just scooting along. We figured it must have gotten lost. We called up animal control. They came out, put it in a huge crate, got it hydrated, good to go, and released it. Then the universe was like, hold my beer. Because at the same time we had the turtle to deal with, a fire hydrant exploded, and a truck got stuck in the mudflats, all at the same time. So yeah, it's a lot. Sometimes nothing at all for a few months. That's A-okay. I still got paid the same amount, either way. I have seen a lot of people die out here, though. Some folks come to the parks to hurt themselves. People want to die in a beautiful place. One time we had a fella having a heart attack down in the flats. He said, forget it. He drove up to the ridge to let it happen. He died in his car looking out over the trees. I guess he's part of the woods now, in a way. I don't know, there's something out there I can't quite put my finger on. Definitely smarter than us. I guess that's why I was drawn to the parks in the first place. What? Listen, man, what's out there can help anyone do what I do. You mean perform miracles? Sorry, boss, that's just a bit much. If everyone can do it, why'd my best friend get cancer in high school? Okay, fair enough. I have an idea. So Gene bought us a couple of bus tickets, real miraculous, and we drove down to Flint. You've probably heard of Flint, but if you haven't, it's this town in Michigan that's really been struggling with a water crisis and has gone without much help. We get down there and the city is weirdly quiet for a city in spring. Gene took us to a local food bank. A bunch of people recognized him there, but most of them didn't really make a lot of eye contact, so it was pretty awkward. This one kid, this little girl, probably around 8, Kayla, shows up, and she's got one thing on her mind. A Smucker's Uncrustable peanut butter and jelly sandwich. This was, of course, the champagne of low-nutrition snacks. But I'd just given away the last one to the family before hers. I started to say sorry because I remember giving away my last one. I told her that. But she pointed into my box where there was a Smucker's Uncrustable peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Confused, I handed it to her and she started to jog back to her family. But before she got halfway back, she stopped, turned around and jogged back to me to ask for another sandwich for her uncle. By now, I'm certain that I have no more. I open my mouth again, but she's looking at my box, where there's another Smucker's Uncrustable peanut butter and jelly sandwich. She keeps staring at it, so I hand her the damn thing, and then she asks for another sandwich for her aunt, and I find another one. One for her mom and her older brother. Heck, her uncle wants another one. So now she's a sandwich courier, carrying more vacuum-sealed peanut butter than I've ever seen in my entire life. And by now, other people have started to notice. So I'm handing out more of these Uncrustables, and I really don't know where they're coming from. A couple people are laughing and trying to peek into my box, but it's just a normal box, so I panic and pretend it's some sort of elaborate magic trick. Kayla doesn't really seem to care. And even though she's still eating, she manages to talk a lot. Pretty soon, she's introduced me to her whole family. She lives with her mom and dad and older brother, and they all got sick when the water got bad. She said her mom started making her do everything with bottled water, except for taking a bath. They cooked with bottled water, but most of the time they just ate whatever they could microwave. She said the best nights were pizza nights. They used to only happen on weekends, but now they're doing pizza every other night. She said her mom seemed sad, but the pizza was good. While she was talking, she kept scratching at these rashes on her arms. She said that they'd shown up after one of her baths. Her mom bought creams and lotions for the whole family, but Kayla forgot to put hers on that day, so the rashes were back. Everyone in the family had had them at some point. Red, hot, and itchy, so they were trying to take the fewest number of baths possible, which she thought was great because she never liked bath time. She finished up the sandwich and looked at me. I grabbed another one from the box, the last one. I gave it to her and she jogged back to her family where her mom, Trish, put an arm around her shoulder. Kayla waved back at me and I nodded and smiled, and then I caught Gene's eye. And he made this stupid little grin, so I took off my gloves and we snuck out the back of the warehouse together. We get outside and Drew goes, "What was that?" Which I thought was pretty hysterical. I told him it's mostly just a matter of perspective. And when you know that, you could participate in things that other people considered miracles. It's kind of like a doctor or a surgeon stitching up a wound. You know, you gotta do all the work to get the skin and the bone in the right place, and then something else takes over. Our body knits itself back together. I guess we don't consider it a miracle because we're just used to it. But that's kind of my point. Heck, it's like most of the moms at the food bank, you know, multiplying dollars and diapers to take care of their kids. If that's not miraculous, I don't know what is. I think the whole world is doing it constantly. All we gotta do is get things in the right place and then let it happen. I read this about plants once. A leaf bathed in light, with stomates wide open to the breath of the air, is not unlike the healer, with mind wide open to wisps of thought, like roots to connect, fruits to nourish, seeds to endure, and scents to call back memory, all from light and air turned into sugar. One day, after I'm a daffodil, I will be able to photosynthesize. It's something to look forward to. I think we're a lot more like daffodils than we realize. Just remembering that's the trick. I told Drew the land is a living thing and we're not separate from it. So if you can accept your relationship to it, if your ego can handle being just a little piece of it, oh, you're cooking with gas. But I could tell he was still pretty skeptical. So we started walking, and I had some fun healing people as we went. Boom! Gotcha! You're healed. Have a fantastic day. A cold? Ka-chow! Could have fixed that with a flu shot. Wash your hands, you animal. Kidney stones, mother, father, sister, brother. Not today. Oh, hemorrhoids, eh? No comment. Oh, false alarm, folks. Don't you worry. This fella doesn't have a hemorrhoids. Probably doesn't even know what they are. So when you're bad with enough pressure, never mind. Never mind. Just remember, though, if you see this fella around at other shows, no hemorrhoids. Oh. Sorry, ma'am, I can tell, being all powerful, you were thinking maybe he does in fact have the hemorrhoids. Just a little. You didn't really think so because that'd be a crazy coincidence right now, but you weren't certain that he doesn't have them. And it's just important to me that you let that go. Woo! I was pretty tuckered out. And then Drew goes, "So you could save everyone?" And I had to admit, no. It only worked at the level of the individual. You had to be there, totally present. I mean, a farmer can't grow plants with the idea of seeds somewhere else, and a doctor can't sew stitches with the general idea of a wound somewhere else. What Drew was thinking of was fixing the concept of poverty and suffering, which is something else entirely. Some folks were uncomfortable with it, called it black magic, but most people just thought it was silly or a coincidence, especially those poor fuckers with hemorrhoids. But the part that fascinated me the most, so not a lot of folks stuck around for more. I could heal some bodies, and then a lot of people went right back to really tricky lives. I tried to talk to people about the land, but as soon as they got healed, they'd run off to bring someone else to get fixed. I started feeling like a vending machine. Be more like the plants, baby. Do shit and give it away. By now, we were pretty deep into downtown Flint when Drew and I spotted a protest about the water crisis moving down Saginaw Street towards City Hall. Happened to be right across the street from the police headquarters, so it was a pretty big storm brewing. We'd just been talking about doing shit, so we started walking. Didn't even have to say anything to each other. Just started headed towards the crowd. We joined the crowd, and I very quickly realized that we are very white. And very much still in our park ranger uniforms. People keep looking at the badges, so I just keep nodding and smiling. I try to head towards the front to help out the leaders, but Jean gently holds me in place, and we stay marching right where we joined, with our attention fixed squarely ahead. As we get closer, I can see there's a line of police outside the front doors of City Hall. We keep getting closer and closer and louder, and it doesn't seem like we're slowing down, and the police look pretty ready to get involved, so I try to put a hand on Gene's shoulder, but he speeds up. And I kid you not, he mutters under his breath with a grin, "These are not the protesters you are looking for." And the police barricade parts in the middle, literally sliding sideways. I catch up with Gene, and now he's chaining himself to the front of the building along with the other protesters, effectively locking people in from the outside. He hands me a pair of cuffs, and I freeze. This is not good. But I figure leaving the Messiah in a time of need, not a great look. So I clip in next to Gene, and as soon as I do, the police regain control of their limbs and they start brandishing their riot gear and shooting rubber bullets at the protesters. They pretty quickly shatter one of the expensive City Hall windows, so they stop doing that. And they start focusing on the protesters that have moved off to the side, one of them being Gene. He caught a rubber bullet in the gut and he goes down hard. I rush over and I can tell that he's wheezing, and when he lifts up his shirt, you can see these giant black and blue bruises starting to form. I try to help him to his feet, but he starts fumbling with his belt. I can't tell what he's doing right away, but before I can stop him, he's dropped his cargo pants to his knees and bent over, sending those pasty white cheeks into the air. I just stand and stare along with everyone else that can see through the tear gas and the pepper spray, and then he gets shot again. Literally shot in the ass. He goes down, and now he stays down. I'm like, Gene, you idiot, you're going to get yourself killed. And finally he goes, "Okay, I think I'm ready to go now." We hustle to the side of the street trying to find ice or medical treatment when a cop comes charging out of the smoke and grabs his other arm, and we crash into the ground. The cop mushes Gene's face into the pavement, and he angrily reads us our rights, and that's how I went to prison for the first time. "12 hours later, we're still in the holding cell. It's early in the morning, I'm tired and sore, but I can't imagine how much worse it must be for Gene. 2 cops show up to tell us that we're facing some really serious charges. I start to freak out, but Gene, who's lying on the ground, trying not to put too much pressure on his purple cheeks, doesn't seem to care. Until they told us that they'd called Huron Manistee. They said that we'd be able to leave with a warning and a flag on our records, but we wouldn't have to face any prosecution because of our service records with the national parks. We wouldn't have to put up any kind of bail, but we were off the service permanently. While the cops were unlocking the doors, they told us that some woman had stopped by to drop off a note. It was Trish, Kayla's mom, and she'd seen us get arrested. Me and Gene sat on the front steps of the station together. It seemed like he was about to apologize, but then he stopped. I knew I could have left the protest at any time, but it didn't make the news any easier, and I think you could tell I was feeling pretty overwhelmed. We were right across the street from City Hall, so there was broken glass, leaflets, and tear gas canisters all over the place. It looked like a war zone, which didn't help me calm down very much. Jean opened the note from Trish. She'd left her phone number and just wanted to make sure that we were okay. I will admit, at this exact moment, I was not feeling super okay. And Gene could tell, and he goes, "How you doing there, champ?" A little... I actually thought I'd feel worse than I do. I realized I wasn't all that concerned about losing my job or even adding the world's shortest crime spree to my record. I was feeling more grounded than I had in a long time. I caught Gene smiling at me. I think he knew what I was thinking, but he didn't say anything. I realized I didn't want to go back, not to my old life, not even back up to Huron Manistee. This place, being with Gene, I felt the same something I got when I was alone in the woods. Gene chuckled to himself, and then he grabbed his gut and his butt in pain. So I jumped up to put a hand on his shoulder, and I was struck by how frail he seemed, knocked flat just from laughing. I gave him a hug, and he managed to squeeze me back, and then he goes, "Looks like we got some time to kill, kiddo. Let's go say hi to Kayla and her mom." Roger Dodger, Chief. So we call up Trish, and she invites us over for dinner, which after the last 12 hours sounds fantastic. We get directions and we show up later that night. When we get there, she throws open the door and introduces us to Toby, her eldest son, and Marcus, her husband, and then Kayla comes charging down the hall with the sound of voices. The house was pretty tiny, but it was warm and cozy, and incredibly generous for them to let us stay and have dinner. Gene produced a bottle of wine, which we definitely did not pick up on the way over. Then Trish brought us into the dining room for a giant pot of chili and buttered rolls. I was a little embarrassed when Gene managed to fit a whole roll into his mouth in one go, but Kayla loved it, and even Toby and Marcus laughed. There was this awkward moment, though, when Trish went to go and get something for everyone to drink. She offered me water, and I said no a little too quickly. I think she could tell why I was a little paranoid, so she brought some soda instead. But it had ice cubes in it, so I didn't really touch it. At the end of the evening, Gene gulped it down for me. He was a super conversationalist, but the star of the show was Kayla. She was energetic, upbeat, outspoken, and as it turns out, completely nuts about bugs. I thought I liked critters, but she and Gene were something else, trading facts all night. And at the end of the evening, once we'd put the plates away, she showed us a corner of her room where she had been corralling spiders so she could watch them spin webs together. She showed Gene her bug journals where she'd pasted pictures from magazines and even added some of her own drawings, some of which were actually pretty good. While she was showing Gene her journals, though, she kept scratching at her arms. Trish caught me looking and quietly explained that Kayla's rashes hadn't been going away. She said that everyone in the family had stopped having the rashes, but they had other symptoms here and there, like bleeding gums, and I noticed that Marcus was really low energy at the end of the night. Trish said that some of the older folks in the community had even died from something called Legionnaire's disease. It sounded horrible. We make it back into the living room so Caleb can play with her bug stuffed animals, according to their ecological niche, of course. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the night, Trish tells us that she works for a local nonprofit and volunteers with community organizations to protect the city, and she wants to show us the next day. So early the next morning, Trish drops us off at the St. Francis Church, and we meet Pastor Dunnigan. And Dunnigan brings us around to this ratty old mob. And we head around to the back, to the parking lot, where it looks like a group of guys is working on a giant pile of rubble. Dunnigan introduces us to Davis, the head of the operation. This big fella with giant forearms covered in sweat and dust from the jackhammers and pavement breakers. Davis explains that technically they're an environmental group. Originally he'd been in construction, but he got recruited to free up land for community gardens before the water crisis started. He and his crew would research the best types of plants for extracting heavy metals from the soil. Then they'd go around ripping up huge strips of asphalt and concrete and planting those species all over the city to soak up as much toxicity as possible and then sell those plants to nurseries and greenhouses around the state. It was a fucking miracle! While he was talking, some of his crew started to plant bright yellow sunflowers in the corner of the parking lot that had already been stripped. He explained that sunflowers could handle high lead levels and keep on growing, and they sold great around the state, because who doesn't love sunflowers? Before he could explain anything more about the flowers, though, 2 cops pulled into the parking lot. They got in Davis's face about having the right permits. He had all the permits for the project, but they kept giving him a hard time about the noise complaints. So Gene tried to get involved. The police recognized him from the precinct and the protest, but they didn't have any probable cause to arrest him, so they tried to ignore him, which would have been great for me, just to disappear into the pavement, but Jean kept crowding them, so their little group had to do this awkward shuffle in the middle of the parking lot. I think the cops were pretty pissed that they couldn't be as intimidating as they wanted with Jean hovering at their elbows. So eventually they took off, and Davis shut down the power tools to give the noise a break, but he told me and Jean that we could use the sledgehammers and the pickaxes to start smashing the pavement and flipping over these huge slabs of concrete. The demolition was awesome, but Jean stayed pretty quiet for most of it. About an hour later, Pastor Dunnigan came back. He looked pretty shaken, and he told us that Trish had called him because Kayla was in the hospital. So we thanked Davis and the crew really quickly, and Dunnigan brought us back to Trish's place. We got back, and Toby and Marcus were there, but we didn't say anything until Trish got back. We could tell it was really bad right away. She sat down, her eyes were red, and she told us that Kayla had been diagnosed with Legionnaire's disease. And the infection had started to spread, so they weren't certain if she was going to make it.
So we get to the hospital, and they only let Trish back to see her. Kayla's been slipping in and out of consciousness, and the antibiotics haven't shown any sign of helping, which is not good, because the infection can get pretty bad. We were waiting in the waiting room, hoping for some good news, and I could tell Drew was fritzing out a bit. So I suggested we go and get some food for the whole family. Man can't survive on vending machine snacks alone. So we crossed the street towards the river, and I spot a diner. I figured the family could do with a fresh slice of pie. So we start heading towards the diner as the crow flies. Jean, there's no way over. Let's go around. But I brought us down to the edge of the water. The river rushing past, it smelled. Jean, look at the sign. We're clearly not supposed to be here. There was a chemical plant upstream with a pipe spewing out into the water. I gestured for Drew to cover his nose, and we kept inching forward. Jean, I'm getting covered in mud. What the hell? And then I realized that he'd been walking on top of the mud and not getting sucked in. We inched forward together, and Drew's grip on me tightened as he realized what was coming next. I pulled him forward, and when I looked down, the water was sliding beneath our feet like glass. We took step after step until we were well past the middle of the river. I squeezed Jean's hand, and he squeezed back, and then he let go, and it was just me standing on top of the water. I got to the other side pretty quick. Drew was lollygagging for a while. I get it.
Stop right there and put both your hands on your head.
And then a bright white spotlight caught us right in the face.
The cops hadn't seen me yet, but Jean glanced back in my direction, nodded once, and I fell down into the water. I floated with the river past a bend, and I got out on the other side. It was so stupid. Of course they'd be patrolling the chemical plant. And then it hit me. Jean was going to be in so much trouble for the second trespassing charge. They told us as much when we were leaving the station the first time. I was soaking wet, but I didn't know what else to do, so I started to head back towards the hospital. I get back, and I'm dripping all over the place, but I'm too worried about Jean to care. I find the family, and I sit. Trisha's back, and they're all crying. And then I hear, Drew, she's gone. I didn't know what to say. I lost a friend in high school to cancer, and I went to his funeral, and it was bizarre. Like, too early. Like, inappropriately ahead of schedule. Just like this. Finally, I clear my throat to say something about going to get Jean. I don't have the heart to tell him, and honestly, I don't know where to begin. And then somehow, when I look up, he's standing right there, a little out of breath. And then he walks straight past us through the hospital doors toward the patient rooms. I jump up trying to get him to come back, but he keeps marching towards Kayla's room. I'm jogging behind him, apologizing to the hospital staff that we've just blown past, and now he's at the head of her bed, hand on her shoulder, and the air starts to feel different. The smell of pine and soil fills the room. The family's crowded in the doorway, and I can hear shouting down the hall. And then the noise fades. And it's just us in the room for a moment. And then Kayla opens her eyes. The cops burst into the room and they tackle Jean to the ground. The whole place smells like disinfectant again. Kayla's family doesn't say anything as the cops cuff Jean. In fact, they look a little bit relieved. They haul Jean towards the door, but at the last second, he locks eyes with me, and he winks. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time any of us ever saw Jean. I went to the police station the first thing the next day, but they wouldn't give me any information, so I waited around all day until they closed the doors and kicked me out. I came back day after day until finally they told me that he'd gotten sick, but they couldn't release any information without the state's approval. Eventually, I found out that he had died in custody. The state ran an autopsy for legal reasons, and it turns out that he'd had Legionnaires too. That's the thing about the infection. The old and the young were the most vulnerable to it. He died in his cell, alone. This April will be 1 year since he died. I went back to the sunflower field. Davis and his crew had torn up dozens of lots since me and Jean had been there. They got the EPA to test the soil and the groundwater around the new fields. All the results showed significant improvements to the lead levels. In fact, they got a federal grant to keep tearing up concrete and replacing it with more soil, native plants, and of course, more sunflowers. And then I remembered. One day, I will be able to photosynthesize. It's something to look forward to. So there he was, sucking up lead and spinning it into sugar, in that brilliant sea of yellow. I visit that plot as often as I can. We sow more seeds every season, flinging them as far and as wide as we can to keep rejuvenating the land. In fact, I saved some, and I brought them with me. Under your chairs, you'll find a little packet of sunflower seeds for you to take. Plant them wherever you can, as quick as you can, or pass them on to someone you know, someone who needs them. And when you do, I hope you think of my friend.
And a voice spoke to him from the woods, a voice neither male nor female, loud nor soft, a voice infinitely kind. And the voice said unto him, Not my will, but thine be done. For what is thy will is mine for thee. It is in the path of our happiness that we find the learning which we have chosen this lifetime. That you have learned this day, and I choose to lead you now to walk your own path as you please.
Festival deserves a hand as well. Thank you for showing up, for being here and supporting live theater. We really, really appreciate it. Please write a review on the Fringe website. Please go see more shows. I'm going to do a quick round of applause for Pam and my co-writer Andrew. And if you'd like to support the mission as we take the show on tour and support some of the organizations that inspired the show, you can find the venue outside. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you again.